we are about to get started. I am going to ask those of you sitting at the tables if you could please move to the front. The tables will need to be available for staging for the following session. So, thank you. Thank you very much for being here. I would first like to take the opportunity to thank Dr. Brenda Wrigley, who is going to be our distinguished speaker today. Dr. Wrigley teaches and conducts research in the areas of gender and diversity, public relations, corporate communications, crisis communications, and management. She is particularly well-versed in LGBTQ issues affecting organizations and society, and in diversity training and engagement for management and employees to create more socially responsible practices. Dr. Wrigley is also the director of the Integrated Marketing Communications Program at Emerson College. We're very, very fortunate to have her here this morning, so join me in giving her a very warm applause to welcome her.
Well, thank you very much for having me here. This is my first visit to LaSalle, and I like it. It's a very nice campus. I've had a chance to meet a few folks here and hope to meet some more of you after the session and during some question and answer. I view my presentation here as a little bit different, maybe from some of the others you're going to have. I could offer you lots of career advice, how to network, what is integrated marketing communication, where is it going? Gosh, we could have, days and days talking about all that kind of stuff. But we all talk about the things we care about, and so that is the reason I picked this particular topic for our time together. Now, I don't think it's any news bulletin to any of you that we live in a pretty crazy world. A world where marketers seem to shoot themselves in the foot, right, left, and sideways. You have to be pretty enough, you have to be thin enough, you have to be just the right color, you have to be just the right person in order to be thought of as mainstream, as normal, as acceptable. To me, that's unacceptable. I made this my life's work because of things I have experienced and things I've read about and people I've talked to and studied. So you may be familiar with these cases, at least the pasta case, where the Gorilla CEO said that he would not feature any LGBTQ people in advertising for the company because he preferred to use traditional families. I don't know what the word traditional means anymore because families come in all shapes, sizes, colors, sexual orientations, ethnicities, partnerships, combinations we can possibly imagine. My hunch is that some of these brands have to get kicked in the head before they realize that they're making really dumb decisions, and they need to be more mindful of who's out there and the people with whom they're communicating. It's rather laughable that Forbes would remove an article that says the tech industry does not have a diversity crisis. These kinds of things happen all the time, though. And you pick up any paper, you go to any website, you read news on your phone, wherever you get your news, you see all kinds of things like this happening one after another. One thing about this is it should be reassuring to you that all these things are happening, not because they're good, but because all of you will be employable thanks to the human beings running some of these companies. There will always be a job for you, because hopefully you have more common sense than a lot of the people running these companies. Okay? Now, we could talk about this topic for weeks, and everybody else will, and we'll let them do that. There are even polls on civility these days. Weber Shandwick, which is a large international firm of marketing and public relations companies, does a Civility in America study. I didn't know there was such a thing until a couple of weeks ago. And it found that 90% of the respondents found Donald Trump the most uncivil candidate of the bunch. The runner-up was thought so by 47%. The discussion of diversity and inclusion in the political process these days has been, to be kind, interesting, and to be realistic, troubling. Now, marketers do things sometimes because of the speed of communication, and speed has to be matched with thoughtfulness. So we just heard from a panel, and I thought it was a great panel, because they talked about the things you can do on social media that can really get you in trouble. And you should really think before you post. So somebody at KitchenAid decided it would be a good idea, just before Obama was elected, to say that his grandmother would have been so appalled that he was elected that she had to die before she could see him elected. I don't know in what universe that kind of comment would be thought of as appropriate for anybody, let alone a company, but it got out there, and NBC Politics, of course, retweeted it, and away it went. We're not short of examples in just about every facet of our lives. The NFL has yet to clean up its reputation about a number of things. Full disclosure, I am a Patriots fan. I think the NFL has been silly about a lot of things, but I think it's really been troubling about things such as domestic abuse. And so we talk about a process in marketing communication and public relations called issues management, which is the opposite of crisis management. So crisis management is when the proverbial stuff hits the fan and you clean it up. Issues management is using enough foresight to track issues that may impact your organization and plan ahead for them. So I have to wonder if there is an issues management team at the NFL, and if there is, they must have been thinking about other things or hoping that this issue, although it seemed to be very pervasive, would not come up. I always tell my students, nothing is a secret forever. You can't get away with anything anymore, good or bad. It's always going to come out. People are going to find you. They're going to find out what you're doing. They're going to find out what you're saying in meetings that you thought were private. It's just too easy for information to make its way to the general public. And we have to think thoughtfully about how we shepherd organizations through life. We didn't expect it to get this much attention, really? We hadn't seen the video until you did, really? People just don't buy those kind of things. They just don't believe organizations. And so it comes down to trust, and it comes down to credibility. I commend to you the Edelman Trust Barometer. It's EDELMAN is the organization. They're the largest public relations firm in the world, still privately held. And every year, about this time, they release their Trust Barometer. And they look at trust in business, trust in government, and it's a worldwide survey to track what kinds of entities people find most trustworthy. Business is doing a little better these days in the trustworthy category, but not much. Government, depends on where you are, but if you're right here in the good old US of A, not trustworthy at all. And I think the current campaign is showing us that people are expressing views objecting to that. Locally, we've seen people subpoenaed to testify in the Bill Cosby case. This is a really good example of how a brand gets built around a person and how important trust and credibility is in that case. A person who was revered as an entertainer, a person who for decades really was responsible for bringing a lot of happiness to a lot of people. But as we have seen, it's readily apparent that sometimes there's something more going on than just what we can see on the outside. You think about all these cases, we could put up cases like this for literally hours. I'm just giving you a few examples. So why am I doing this? Well, I think it's important for you to think about this aspect of communication just as much as learning the skills of production, the skills of writing, which, by the way, I still think is the most important skill. My students don't like that I'm so critical of their writing, but too bad. But there's just so many cases like this. And I find that your generation, I'm using Emerson students as an example. I don't know if you've ever visited Emerson. We're kind of a quirky place, and we're kind of proud that we're a quirky place. We're just a little bit different. We're very much social activists. We get mad about stuff, we get excited about stuff, and we do something. So when I talk to my students about this kind of thing, they're pretty plugged into this kind of stuff. And my hunch is that you are too, that you pay attention to these kinds of things, and that you get upset when you see things going on that you know shouldn't be. I think your generation is a lot more inclusive. I think your generation is a lot more accepting of a lot of things. And I'm grateful for that because I think it will help create a sea change in the culture that's going to have people much more in tune with issues of diversity and inclusion and insisting that they be addressed. Troubling to me, one of my alma maters is Mizzou, University of Missouri, Columbia, where I got my undergrad degree in broadcast journalism. I won't tell you what year. It was a while ago. And this is a picture from recent protests. You may have heard that actually a communication professor there took it upon herself to not lead a protest, but be very actively involved in a protest, ask for, quote, some muscle to move reporters out of the way at the protest, and then block the police, we found later, from entering a road to help keep order. She was a full-time communication professor, and she also had an appointment at the school where I learned journalism, the School of Journalism at Mizzou. The journalism school, revoked her appointment almost right away. And recently the board of overseers, trustees, whatever they're called there, decided to terminate her employment. There's been a lot of pushback from some faculty who said it wasn't fair. She was just exercising her free speech rights. But as a person teaching journalism, I find it hard to imagine how she could justify trying to muscle reporters out of the way to cover something. When I went to Mizzou, I have to be honest with you, I found it to be a very racist place, although I was a much younger person and didn't understand the full scope of that. I do now, and I'm troubled by what's going on there, but I'm also troubled by what's going on a lot of other campuses, where free speech is clashing with a lot of other values, and I think those issues are going to be with us for quite a long time. Now you're going to get some hints about my age, and I'll ask you my age later, see if you can guess, and please be kind. I am walking these days with a cane. I have torn meniscus in one knee and arthritis developing in the other, and So I'm feeling very old these days, so be kind. I did grow up in the 60s, and this is a picture from the Watts riots in Los Angeles. And I remember when I was about, 12 years old, late at night watching the black and white television with the live coverage of cities in America burning over racial unrest, economic unrest, all of those kinds of things. So I thought it'd be interesting to put those two pictures next to each other. Are things really different? Or are they the same? Food for thought. So, I wouldn't be a professor if I didn't toss a little theory into the presentation. So indulge me if you will. Anybody know what we mean by hegemony? Ooh, okay. In shorthand, it's the status quo and acceptance of the status quo with tacit approval, without ever questioning the way things are, and just assuming that the way things are is the way things have always been and the way things should be, more importantly. And why would we ever question it? It's just giving approval to the way things are by not questioning is an oversimplified definition. Probably framing to some of you journalism or communication students would be more familiar. And it's the notion that we have what's called pictures in our heads. We have mental shorthand, we have stereotypes we develop for different people, situations, concepts, and we draw upon those daily to make judgments, to look at people in certain ways, to take certain actions. So we have certain pictures in our mind of people of different races. We have certain pictures in our mind of the genders. We have certain pictures in our mind of what professors should look like, be like, act like, what students should be like, look like, act like, how we should deal with issues of racial unrest, social injustice, economic inequality. All of those things have frames around them in our heads. Now, frames and stereotypes can be helpful, although the term stereotype has a very negative connotation to most people. But stereotypes develop a mental shorthand for us so that we can get through daily life and navigate without having to stop and analyze every single situation and come to some conclusion about it. So if we look at them that way, they are useful, but where they are dangerous is when they get calcified and when they become ways of burying us or locking us out from the possibility of other alternatives. I don't think barriering is a word. I just invented it. Okay. Cultivation theory started with research in television, and it's mostly stayed in television research. But it's the notion that people who consume more television tend to develop stereotypes reflected in television. So they believe there's much more crime in the world than there really is, statistically. They believe that relationships are a certain way, as seen on television, than they are more so in real life. And they have developed a lot of stereotypes about race in our culture and about a lot of other things. So, researchers study the things that matter from their point of view after things happen to them, things that they're curious about, and things that they want to change. So let me tell you a story, since storytelling is your theme. It was June 10th, 1996, at 3:30 in the afternoon. I was a marketing communication manager for a heavy equipment company in the Northeast. I had a meeting with the vice president of marketing, who was my boss. I walked down the hall with a heavy stack of projects to talk about. This was pre-tablets. So you carried everything in big file folders. Crazy, I know. But thank God for tablets. So this woman met me halfway down the hall, and she said, "We're not meeting in my office. We're meeting down here." What do you suppose was down here? Guesses?
HR.
Yeah. Who said that? Good guess. Good
I've
guess.
been through it enough.
You've been around the block. Okay. So we walked down to HR to a tiny little office where the HR, and I sat down at a little round table with him and my boss, and I was handed a letter with one sentence. It said, "You have failed to sufficiently develop staff. Therefore, your employment is terminated immediately." Terminated. Did I see it coming? Sure. How come? Well, remember, I'm the PR and marketing person, but I knew everything that was going on in the company. I knew the CEO was having a 20-year affair with his assistant, but he was married with 5 children and more grandchildren than I could count, and had a beautiful picture of them on his credenza behind him whenever he was interviewed for television. I knew the company was not hiring people with disabilities, even though that was against federal employment laws. I knew the company was dumping toxic waste in a local landfill, but they asked me to lie about it, and I wouldn't. So why did I get fired? I knew too much. I was too credible. A PR person who was too credible had too much integrity. Oh my goodness. So I was walked back to my office by the human resource person. And when I walked in my office, there were 2 big cardboard boxes on the desk waiting for me to load my stuff and be escorted out by security. I walked over to my computer. Yes, we had computers even in those days. And tried to log into email, and I was already locked out. Now, what I didn't tell you is that for the 2 years prior to that, every night, incriminating emails, incriminating reports, all that kind of stuff were copied by me, shoved in my briefcase, taken home, and put in a safe. Why? Because I figured one day I'd need them. And I even told my family, and this is going to sound really creepy, if anything happens to me, here's the combination to the safe, and you'll know who did it. Now, when companies have a lot at stake, and somebody can blow the whistle, lots of stuff can happen. You just never know. So the person at the front of the room got fired from her only marketing communication job she ever held, and is now the chair of a department of marketing communication at Emerson. Bet you didn't know that. So, just goes to show, sometimes you need a kick in the pants to go do what you really should do. And so here I had been a broadcast journalist. I had been in sales management, radio and television. I had been a commercial copywriter and production person in radio. I'd been a corporate communications, marketing communication person for almost 7 years. And I said, what would I like to do next? And they offered me this outplacement guy who said, so, what are you going to do now? Which I thought was a really caring way to put it. And I said, well, I know they're good companies to work for, but I don't think corporate America's for me. I want to go teach. He said, well, why don't you go find out what you need to do that? So I was just finishing up my master's degree at Syracuse in public relations. The company paid for the degree, so I got that out of them at least. And I'll tell you what happened to the company in a few minutes. The story ends very well. advisor, and I had 2 more courses to take in the summer, took them, graduated. She said, well, if you want to teach, you really need a PhD, you need to go back to school. I said, well, I have a mortgage, and I remember exactly, it was $958 a month. I had a car payment, and I had no visible means of support other than myself. So I said, well, that would be great, but I can't afford to go back to school. I have all these financial obligations, and I have to have money coming in. And she said, well, somebody just dropped out for fall in the PhD program. You could interview and see if you get in. And then let's figure that out. So providentially, I interviewed and got in. I took my comp exams for the master's degree the first week in August. I started the PhD program the last week in August before they even knew if I passed my comps. I guess they were betting on me, thinking I was a safe bet. And started a PhD program. I only had money for 3 years, and then I had to be done or do something else. I made $10,000 a year as a TA. That was just a tiny bit less than what I made in the corporate world. My house wouldn't sell for a year. I know what ramen noodles are. Gas went up to a whopping $1.65, and I was horrified because I commuted 2 hours a day to and from my home to Syracuse to go to school. I had to finish in 3 years, so I did. I just did it. And then they kick you out and they say go forth and go somewhere else. And so I went to Michigan State University for 5 years and taught in their advertising department. Came back to Syracuse for 9 years, and 3 years ago, I came to Emerson. So, why do I tell you that story? Well, it's fun to tell. Secondly, just because you lose your job, not the end of the world. Probably happens to more people than we know. Yes, standing in an unemployment line is very humiliating, but you get over it. And here's the best part. I won't lie to you, and I'm not promoting drinking, but the night it happened, I had a couple of drinks, but I stayed home. Okay? The next morning, I had no headache, no gut ache. I felt great. And I said, what is going on here? I feel great. I'm out of a job, and I feel great. And the reason I felt great is because the job was just tying me up in knots every day. And they wanted me to lie, and they wanted me to do things that I wasn't really comfortable doing. And so I figured out about myself at that point that whatever I did next, I'd have to be able to be transparent, and I'd have to be able to do things that felt good to me. So, I understand that a hero's coming here later. And, compared to my small story, this guy is amazing. And if you haven't seen the movie, get there. I mean, go see it. It's fabulous. And so I thought it would be good to talk for a little bit about the relationship between journalists and public relations and marketing people. Because I got my first degree in journalism believing I could be for truth, justice, and the American way, change the world, expose wrongdoing, go after crooks, do good things, right? That's what journalists do. And I think most people in any survey you see believe that that should still be the role of journalism. Although there's a lot of confusion on the part of people when you ask them questions that rephrase the First Amendment and ask them if they support that, and they really aren't sure. That's kind of troubling. That's a separate talk. I would argue, though, that journalism isn't the only profession that should be doing this. I think public relations and journalism should both be telling the stories that help us figure out what's going on today and how we fix it. So, transparency, trust, honesty, those are adjectives that should apply to both fields. And if you are a believer that public relations is spin or it's paid liars, I'd like to disabuse you of that notion. Because quite frankly, it's public relations people who control the majority of the content given to journalists. and we better hope it's truthful. And now with technology and globalization, it's very difficult for companies to lie about what they're doing, to conceal things. You just can't get away with that anymore. So I think both fields have not only an obligation but an opportunity to make a really big difference, not just here in the US, but around the world. Often though, the two fields are pitted as enemies rather than allies. And that's just not a good thing. I did a study several years ago of journalists and PR people. And I used a methodology you may not have heard of. It's called Q methodology. And what you do is you take about 36 statements, and these were related to how people make ethical decisions. And so the range of statements was from, I look for the greater good, all the way through to it's all about me, and only me, and everything in between. And then you put this stack of statements in front of a person, and you say, here's a chart. Put these statements on the chart with all the statements you most strongly agree with on this side, and the ones you most strongly disagree with over here. I want journalists to sort for how they make ethical decisions. And then with the PR people, I want you PR people to sort how you make ethical decisions. Okay? Then I said to the journalists, okay, now I want you to sort one more time. How do you think PR people make ethical decisions? So they sorted a second time. And I said to the PR people, how do you think journalists make ethical decisions? And they sorted. Very interesting. Because when it comes to how both groups make ethical decisions, they're more alike than they are different. But it's the perception of each other that's at issue. So, both said they look for the greater good, and I'm greatly oversimplifying here, not selfish interests. But the journalists didn't give PR people much credit for being ethical. Big surprise. The PR people, on the other hand, were much more generous toward the journalists, maybe because they've been socialized to believe the journalists are more ethical, and maybe they've internalized that, and heaven forbid, they really don't think of themselves as very ethical, but they try. So I think this points up that we have to talk to one another to develop an understanding of what's really going on. And I've made it a point in my professional career to have conversations with journalists often, because I was a journalist, I understand what they're up against, and I think they have a great role to play, and I think we should all be helping them. But I also think they should cut PR people a little bit of slack. Now, having said that, before PR tackles those issues, we have to clean up our act. And one of the ways my research got started was in gender research. And the research in public relations, in particular in diversity and inclusion, started with research only about gender. In those days, it was very difficult, and in some places it still is difficult to get tenure if you do this kind of research. Now, people your age might look at me and say, well, that's crazy. That's research too. Those are interesting topics. Why wouldn't colleges and universities want to give you tenure for doing good research in that area? You'd have to ask them. Another story, if I may. I was a freshly minted PhD out of Syracuse, ready to go on the job market. So I went to the biggest conference and interviewed with a whole bunch of schools. And even today, people teaching public relations and marketing are hard to hire into higher education institutions because those people, quite frankly, can make a lot more money going into the business and make 3 or 4 times what they make as educators. So you can see we educators do it because we love it, not for the money. Although the money's pretty good too. It's a comfortable life. So I was interviewing with all kinds of schools and it was going great, and I just felt like the belle of the ball. Everybody wanted to talk to me and try to convince me that their school is the one to go to. And so Brigham Young University was there. And they were interviewing. They have a wonderful PR major. Wonderful. World-renowned, highly regarded. PRSSA chapter that's off the charts, winning all kinds of national competitions, just, you know, kicking everybody's butt every year. So I thought, wouldn't it be great to work for a school like that, where PR is really king, and I could really like that. So I sat down and I interviewed with the woman from BYU, and I had a portfolio and I had a CV, and she read through everything and saw the research I was doing. And she said, well, I see you do research in gender. I said, yes. And she said, well, let me tell you a little bit about our university. She said, we're a Mormon university, and that kind of research just wouldn't get you tenure at BYU. I said, oh, okay. And then she kept reading through my CV, and she saw that I had written a book chapter about the representation of LGBT people on television. And she said, oh, well, that really wouldn't get you tenure at BYU. She said, let me tell you about our university. Any faculty we hire, if they are unmarried, we ask to remain celibate for the time they're here. And we don't allow caffeine consumption on campus. And this kind of research won't fly at BYU. So I said, well, thank you very much. I folded up my portfolio, and I said, well, then I guess the fact that I'm lesbian won't go over well at BYU either, will it? And she put her head literally down on the table, in her hands, and said, oh, up till now I thought we had the perfect candidate. And I extended my hand and shook her hand, and I said, you did. So, is this kind of stuff still going on? Sure. And people today are just horrified by these stories. But people of color, you know, people of different sexual orientations, people of different ethnicities, people who wear something on their head because of their religion, I mean, pick something. People are still vilified and denied opportunity, not just here, but everywhere else for these reasons. So I hope you know that, because it's very important for you to have your antenna up and be watching for this kind of stuff going on. If you want to work in marketing or public relations, and you want to sit in a boardroom with a CEO and VPs and top people, you better have some guts. When the CEO tells a joke about AIDS, as my CEO did years ago, I got up and walked out. Everybody else laughed. Now, did that help me keep that job? Probably not. But you got to decide, who are you? What's important? What can you put up with? Where's your line in the sand, and where does somebody cross that line? Now, PR is loaded with women. We call it a feminized profession. That doesn't mean that everybody in PR is a feminist. That means it's predominantly female. So let's look at some stats here. Overall, PR Week just released their annual salary survey. It's the only real barometer we have of where salaries are going in the field. I could argue with the methodology. It's an opt-in survey. There are a lot of problems with it. We could argue people who make more money would prefer to answer the questions than people who aren't doing so well. And there are all kinds of other methodological holes we could poke in it. But it's the best we have. And if you go to the Department of Labor statistics for our fields, it's hard to figure out because the job titles are all over the map. You know, I'm communications manager. I'm director of communications. I'm marketing communications manager. I'm community relations director. And the list just goes on and on and on. So it's very hard to figure out what's going on in the field. But having said that, every salary survey that comes out anywhere, U.S. Department of Labor, you name it, big surprise here, men are making more than women. On average, $125,000 for men and $80,000 for women in positions of management, particularly in public relations. Now, last time I checked, it's 2016. I went into the workforce in 1975. I see the math going on in the heads. When I went into the workforce in 1975, I realized that I was getting paid less than the men working in broadcast news next to me. And nationally, it was 57 cents to the dollar for women's pay versus men back in 1975. And the National Organization for Women even made pins that said 57 cents that you could wear on your lapel to remind people that there was pay disparity. And we had all kinds of gyrations through the time I was young in the workforce trying to get an Equal Rights Amendment passed. It never did. Equal pay provisions have come before Congress and been slapped down repeatedly. So, is the problem still bad? Yeah, it's bad. It's not as bad as 57 cents, but I don't call 72 cents to the dollar great either, which is the national average now. And I've often said when we've had discussions in class where invariably some of the men kind of chafe at this information and get a little uncomfortable in their chairs and say, well, you know, it's because women have to go off and have children, and it's because women take time out of the workforce, and it's because. But you can control for all those variables statistically and still determine that there is disparity, and it's pretty significant. And years ago even, it was over $1 million difference over a lifetime for women working in public relations. So I say to the men, well, if it's no big deal, let's trade paychecks. You take the 72 cents, I'll take the dollar, and we'll be fine, right? No, we won't. That's not fair. I said, right, it's not fair. So, why is this happening? Well, I did my dissertation on what's called the glass ceiling, probably a concept you're familiar with. And the glass ceiling is that invisible barrier that prevents not just women, but people of color, people of different sexual orientations, ethnicities, socioeconomic backgrounds, you name it, prevents those people from rising to top positions. What causes it? It happened to me in broadcasting. It happened to me in the corporate world. I wanted to know what caused it. It bugged me. It stalled my life. It made me mad. It got me excited. It got me passionate. I needed to know. Did I find out? No. Did I get some clues? Yes. Boys and girls are socialized differently. They still are. Even though things have changed a lot, I agree with that. But if you bring a baby home and he's a boy, you don't put one of those little pink headbands on him. You just don't do that, right? And even today, if a boy an infant is mistaken for a girl, parents just get all upset. No, it's a boy. You know, the fact that he has lots of hair maybe, or maybe he just looks cherubic and feminine, I don't know. Parents worry about that kind of stuff. Why? Well, because it's very important that we decide, are you male or female in this culture? And we get that settled, because you know that really matters. So then we have to go back to hegemony. Why does it matter? Are you going to potentially marry every person you meet, and you must determine whether it's a male or female? You know, I'm being silly here to make a point. These things matter to us because we haven't even thought that they matter, and we haven't even questioned why they matter. So, negotiating salary. Every class I teach, no matter what the topic, the last class, we talk about negotiating salary. And most of my classes in communication, as I'm sure most of yours, are loaded with women. And they say, well, I'm just not comfortable doing that. I've never been taught to do that. That would be rude. They're going to tell me no. They're going to rescind the offer. I just can't bring myself to do it. And so I say, let's practice. And then I say, take a job or an internship that is not really your top choice, and just try out this technique if you get an offer from these people. And invariably, they'll come back to me and say, you know what? They offered me more. And I'll say, wow, how about that? Of course they did, because you outlined, as a man would, all the reasons why X is a more appropriate salary than Y. You have to have justification, but you have to stand up for yourself of whatever salary you start at. So if you start lower, over a lifetime, you're shooting yourself in the foot. So get with it. You know, be brave if that's how you view it. Now, men should do the same thing, and men should care about this, because heterosexual men may have wives who are going to be discriminated against. Or the research shows it really hits home and men get mad when it happens to their daughters. And when it happens to their daughters, their wives, well, you know, but their daughters, oh, no, you're not doing that. You are not doing that. You're not going there because she's worth it, right? So, assertiveness is viewed differently for men and women. I'm going to just go back so we can get rid of this. Bear with me. Women who are assertive are labeled with the B word. And I've done a lot of research in corporations to find out about language and the language people use to describe gender. And women, when they talk about other assertive women, whisper the B word. I can't say it out loud. You know what it is. Men usually don't have any trouble saying it. You know, even little things like I discovered in the auto industry when I did some research there, which is a very, you know, very masculine industry still. Mary Barra, GM CEO, being an anomaly. You know, swearing in the workplace. I actually ended up doing a study by accident about swearing in the workplace. That was not my intention going in, but everybody wanted to talk about it. And it was perfectly acceptable for men to swear in the workplace. It was not only not acceptable for women to do it, it stymied your career if you were known as a woman who could swear like a sailor. So, fascinating stuff, right? Structural issues. The title of the dissertation ended up being, it's not a glass ceiling, it's a structural steel ceiling. Because the whole structure of business and the culture is created to perpetuate stereotypes, to keep people channeled in certain directions, and to keep them thinking about gender and other things in very stereotypical ways. Now, gender is a very important issue, but beyond that, a lot of researchers, myself included, went on to look at a lot of other diversity and inclusion aspects beyond gender. And communications as a whole, and public relations in particular, is still a very white profession. It's extremely white. Only 6% of practitioners nationally are non-white. 6%. If you've looked at any of the demographic data in the US lately, you know that long before 2050, whites will be the minority in this country. Hispanics are now the largest minority, followed now by African Americans. It used to be African Americans and then Hispanics, now it's Hispanics and then African Americans. So before 2050, whites will no longer be the majority in this country. It has huge implications for all of communication. And one of the things it will do is force us to look at the culture and where wealth is held. And even though whites will be a minority, likely a lot of things like the makeup of Congress, the makeup of heads of business, a lot of other things will not change because wealth is held within the white population. Our field lacks diversity of all stripes and forms. That's something that some of us who teach about this have railed against for decades. I just joined the Planck Center at the University of Alabama and their Diversity and Inclusion Committee to look at the research being done, to catalog the research, and to fund research that isn't being done yet to help us understand these issues. And research in this area has also gone beyond strictly looking at gender or strictly looking at your race or strictly looking at these categorical variables, and now looking at intersectionality, which is the compilation of all the different things you are. You are not just a man, you are a white man from a certain socioeconomic category. That makes a difference in how we figure out what's going on in the field and in the culture. So if we should be paying attention to these issues, we should be dealing with them, and by the way, all of you, I'm charging with the responsibility to deal that, whatever you go out and do. You are going to be the voices that bring these things up in a tactful way, but nonetheless, cause companies and organizations to pay attention to these issues. So, if it's so easy and that's just what you should do, why don't companies just do it? Well, I made a brief word cloud, but I could make one with about 1 million different adjectives, and we could talk the rest of our lives about this. So let me tell you some things I've learned in counseling companies over the years. Sometimes you're going to look around the room and you're going to think, what am I doing here? Is everybody crazy but me? And that seems to happen a lot. And that's not because I'm the smartest person in the room, it's just because I'm paying attention to something and everybody else isn't. And it's like, hello, could we stop a minute and think about what's going on here? What's the elephant in the room? I love pointing out elephants in the room. I don't know if you do, but I think that's a lot of fun. Get you in trouble, as I just explained to you earlier, but you know, what are you going to do? What's the worst thing they can do to you? Well, they could fire you, yes. But if you're going to be in communications, you got to have integrity and credibility, so guess what? Pack your bags and go someplace where they'll respect that. And if you don't speak up, then they'll make a stupid, dumb mistake and put their foot in their mouth, and then if you're the communication counselor, you got to pry that foot out toe by toe. So, forewarn them of what they're about to do and encourage them to not do it. Tell the truth, it'll come out later, doesn't matter, it'll always come out sooner or later. How you frame a message is everything in storytelling. Be mindful of the frames that already exist. If you want to change the frame, that has to be done gradually, it has to be done with evidence and examples, and it has to be done in a way that people can accept without being hit over the head with a mallet. And unfortunately, I have more of a mallet personality than I do a persuasive personality. So I've had to kind of tamp that down over the years and try to keep that in check. As my dear departed mother used to say, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so use them in proportion. Good advice. Now, if you don't manage your own reputations as people in communications or whatever fields you might be going into, someone will assign one to you. And wouldn't you rather have some level of control over that reputation than letting everybody else get away with saying who you are and what you're about and what you stand for? Just because it's legal doesn't make it right. Another bit of good advice. And keep a sense of humor. Arthur Page, who was the first VP of corporate communications at AT&T many years ago, the Arthur Page Society of Learned PR People, is named after him. It's an invitation-only group, and I haven't been invited yet, and I'm very upset, but I guess I'll have to get over it. But he said, be calm, patient, and good-humored in any situation, and that's good advice. And once you've lost your integrity, you might as well go sweep floors or do something else, because that's really all any of us has, is our integrity. And that goes for PR people, it goes for journalists, it goes for anybody. And I think your speaker this afternoon, and I wish I could stay to see him, but I can't, because they scheduled a meeting over spring break, which I'm very upset about. But I'm anxious to hear what he has to say. So the good news, there are a lot of chuckleheads out there, and you will never be out of a job, because you're the one who's going to bail them out and help them. So with that, thank you, and I'd like to hear what you think. Don't be shy.
Question? Hi.
What is your name?
My name is Brandy. I'm a freshman,
Okay.
and I'm going into the media, so I'm going to go into the film industry. What advice do you have for someone who, because I want to make film, but I want to stay away from stereotypes that are often portrayed in movies and films, because oftentimes nowadays they don't really have a lot of positive messages. So what advice do you have for someone who wants to start their own film studio, but who also wants to promote something that has a positive image? So what advice?
Good question. Good question. There are a lot of questions within that question. The first thing is, let me put you in touch with a woman by the name of Linda Reisman, who was the executive producer on The Danish Girl. And there's a film nobody wanted to make. And Linda and her colleagues figured out a way to make it, so she could give you some good on-the-ground advice about that. Secondly, work with like-minded people who are willing to do whatever it is to get their idea and their dream to the screen. And these days, it's easier to make films than it ever was in some regards. It can be less expensive, and it can be very effective to make films that Hollywood studios don't spend hundreds of millions of dollars on. If you believe that this needs to change, then you need to be one of the people who will do it. And it needs to be done. So go get them.
Thank you.
Yeah. This young man has a question.
My name's Sean. I was just wondering, maybe I missed this, but what did ever happen with the company that fired you?
Oh, glad you asked, Sean. Whatever happened to the company was the question. Well, right before I got fired, the CEO who was having the affair for 20 years with his assistant, but of course nobody knew. He stacked the board of directors with his cronies. They held a locked board meeting and voted out the chairman whose father had founded the company. The rotten CEO became chairman and CEO. The chairman went off and decided he and his friends had 51% interest in the company. And as much as it broke his heart, he put the company up for sale. It was sold to a company in Sweden. The rotten CEO was out. His wife divorced him, took him for a bag of money. He married his secretary, and they moved to Florida, where they live now. And the company got rid of a scoundrel. The company's still in business today. It's owned by Toyota now, and it makes electronically controlled lift trucks, which is what they made when I was in. And if you want to know anything about material handling, refrigerated warehouses, you name it, I'm your gal. Yes?
Hi, my name's Corinne. A lot of the work you talked about in your dissertation is very inspiring. I do a lot of diversity work myself.
Good.
Just a question for you, especially a woman. Do you ever get exasperated or shut down when you try to do your work in regards to diversity? And if so, what motivates you to keep going?
People who try to shut me down motivate me because I'm stubborn. I guess you figured that out. Huh? Bring it on. You want to try to push back folks. You want to try to keep people down. Just go ahead, because that's all the motivation I need. And I know this is not going to get solved in my lifetime, but I want to spread the word and make people aware, so they ask the questions and they question what's going on. Because until we really question what's going on, there won't be equal pay. There will still be all kinds of things going on in presidential races that, and my politics are going to come out here, sorry, are just despicable. I sit every night staring at the news, and my jaw just drops repeatedly. I can't believe what's going on. And I'm sure there are a lot of other people just like me. So we've got to work for people who want equality. We've got to work for companies who want equality and put their money where their mouth is. The only way you can do it is to vote with your feet and your wallet and your brain. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Howard Cholkin, and I'm a lifelong learner, acting as faculty here at LaSalle. The question I have is more of a statement that relief is on the way for female equality, in that about 60% of the students obtaining college degrees today are women, which is a total flip-flop from not too many decades ago. So I think over time, as women become more prominent in the workplace, the discrimination and lack of diversity will change significantly.
Well, Howard, you're a fellow Newhouse alum, and I don't want to disagree with you, but I have to, and here's why. If that were the case, public relations for decades has been way majority female, and yet the vast majority of people in power in public relations, running companies, running agencies, top management positions are still men. And those numbers have just remained static for a long, long time. So having more people and attrition and all that isn't working. And it's not working in colleges and universities either, quite frankly. When you look at faculty, you look at faculty of color, you look at all these different things. You know, I've often said I don't have several lifetimes to wait for things to get better. I want things to get better now, because I work with young people every day. And they're like my kids, and I send them out, and I don't want to send them into a world where they have to put up with us anymore. And it's not changing, and it's not, you know, attrition hasn't done it, numbers haven't done it. It's the structure in place, and it's the culture in place that keeps perpetuating this notion that women can't be good leaders, women are too emotional, women are not committed enough. You know, do we have childcare for women so they can be CEOs, so they can advance in their careers or do whatever it is they want to do in their careers? No, we don't. Other countries have figured this out and done a very good job. Our country hasn't valued that, and we have to ask why. You know, what's more important than raising children? I can't think of anything. And we say we value it, you know, of course, oh, that's very important. Well, you spend the money for childcare so women can work, so men can work. So fathers can stay at home. You know, a dad staying at home still is looked on it as a real odd duck. Why is that? Why couldn't men be the caregivers and the ones who take care of kids, and the woman is the breadwinner? That's still seen as very not okay by a lot of people. And until we break down those notions that all these kinds of things are unacceptable, I don't see it changing, and it's sad to say. But the only hope I have is that making people like you aware. You go into the workplace with your eyes open, and you ask questions, and you advocate for yourself. And yes, when you're starting out, you have to be careful, and you can't be too strident, and you can't be too in your face about it, but you have to know what's going on if you're going to make it better. Because I don't think any of you should be penalized just because of the way you came out of the womb. I just don't think that's okay. So attrition hasn't worked. I wish it had. I wish numbers did it, but that hasn't been borne out. So.
Soon.
I hope so. I hope so. It's on all of you. Thanks.
As you are all aware, right now we're going to begin with our lunch. Please stay. We have much more going on.